We have seen in the last two lectures that we could combine the Discover module and the Movies module. So with the Discover module, we can search for movies and their movie IDs based on one or many conditions. And then we can use the movie IDs in the Movies module to get the most detailed information available. And here on this course, we won't pull thousands of movies to get more or less the full movies data set. But I've stored a small subset of movie IDs here. And now it's time to experience the real power of Python. So we can simply automate and scale the process of getting the data for many movies. And essentially, we just need a for loop and the requests library. And I've still saved my personal API key, and I import pandas requests JSON. And I define the maximum number of columns displayed. And then we have 19 movie IDs that we received from an earlier request. Well, I can tell you that there are 18 valid IDs and one invalid that doesn't exist. And no surprise, it's the ID 0. But our code should still work with IDs that do not exist. So first of all, let's save the list here in movie ID. And then we have our basic URL for the movie module with two placeholders for the movie ID and the API key. And now let's come to the for loop. And the plan is now to iterate over the movie ID list and get for each and every movie actually the JSON data. And then we save the JSON data in the list, JSON list for all movies. So we create the empty list, the JSON list, and then we iterate over movie ID. And for each and every movie, we actually replace here the placeholders by the respective movie ID and our API key. Next, we create a response object with a request.get, and we pass the URL. And then we have to introduce a conditional statement and check whether the status code of the response object is equal to 200. So 200 is the desired code, and this means that data is available. So if the status code is unequal to 200, we should just stop the iteration and go to the next movie ID. And first of all, let's simply have a look at an example where we do not have data and the status code 200. So it's the movie ID 0. And here we simply pass the corresponding URL to requests.get. And here we get the response 404, so there's no data available. And we can also get the status code 404. And now finally, let's come to the else statement. So if the movie ID exists, then we get the data for that movie in JSON format and store it in the variable data. And then we append the JSON data to our JSON list. And finally, we can convert the complete JSON list into a data frame. So we should delete here the indents, actually. And now let's have a look at the df. So here we have in total 18 movies. And the columns that we should be familiar with, actually, budget, genre, and so on. And now let's select only some columns. So title, ID, revenue, genre, belongs to collection, and runtime. And we sort the movies by the revenue from high to low. And we actually override df. And let's have a look at df. And obviously, these are the most successful movies of all times in terms of revenue, starting with the Avengers, Endgame, Avatar, Star Wars, and so on. Now, finally, the question is, how do we save and store our data set? And the best option is to export it into a JSON file. And we can simply do this with the method toJSON. And we have to define the file name, movies.json, for example. And also here we can define the orientation. And we've already learned that the records orientation is actually the best orientation if we work with pandas. So let's do this here. And to double check, we can now open again the JSON file. and load it into the variable data. And now we can get, for instance, the normalized and flattened data frame. So we could manage to flatten the column belongs to collection, and we created 4 additional columns here. And of course, we can also open a movies.json with pd.readJSON, so this is no problem. And still we have nested data here in this data frame. So for instance, in the column genre, and we can go deeper with pd.json normalize and actually flatten or create a new data frame for the genre column. And that's here the genre data frame. So as a summary, if we export our dataset to a JSON file, and then if we re-import, then the full functionality is still available here. So we have pd.json normalize and all of the optionalities. So that's the best practice, how to save and export our data frame with nested JSON data here. So we simply export it to a JSON file. And in the next lecture, we will see a non-optimal way how to do it. So saving and exporting the data frame here. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next lecture. Bye.